So, me caveman, let's go. Number 10. The Bruniquel Cave Structures. Picture yourself 336 meters inside a mountain. There is no light, no sound but water dripping onto stone. You are deep inside Bruniquel Cave in southwest France, far past any point daylight has ever reached. And here, on the floor of this black chamber, someone built something. 2 great rings, laid out from hundreds of broken pieces of stalagmite. The question is not only who built them, it is when. The cave was rediscovered in 1990, when cavers led by a teenager named Bruno Kowalczewski cleared a rubble-choked passage over several years. When they squeezed through, the rings were waiting in the dark. 2 ring-shaped structures, plus 4 smaller piles, made from around 400 snapped stalagmite pieces. Researchers call these pieces speleophacs. Together, they weigh an estimated 2.2 metric tons, roughly the weight of a small car, all of it stone that someone moved and stacked by hand. The larger ring is about 6.7 meters across, the smaller one a few meters wide. This was not a random heap. The builders chose stalagmite segments of similar length, snapped them cleanly, and arranged them in 2 deliberate ovals, propping some pieces upright with others. Microanalysis of the stone even revealed several separate spots where fires had burned, including one on top of a stalagmite pile. For years, no one could date it. An early attempt on a burnt bear bone gave only a minimum age of about 47,600 years. Then, in 2016, a team led by Jacques Jobert and the geologist Sophie Verheyden tried a different clock. They used uranium series dating on the fresh calcite that had grown over the broken stalagmites. That mineral regrowth acts like a seal with a timestamp. The results stunned everyone. The rings were about 176,000 years old. That date changes everything. 176,000 years ago, modern humans were not in Europe. The only people here were Neanderthals. This makes Bruniquel the earliest known Neanderthal construction on Earth, and building it was no small feat. To work that deep, in total darkness, you need fire. Sure enough, the stalagmite pieces show reddened and blackened burn marks, and there is burnt bone among them. Fires were lit on the structures themselves. Think about what that requires. You have to master fire. You have to plan a route hundreds of meters underground. You have to cooperate, carry heavy stone, and choose pieces of similar size, which the builders clearly did. This is abstract planning in a place with no light and no landmarks. It is exactly the behavior older textbooks insisted Neanderthals could not manage. What were the rings for? No one knows. Some suggest ritual. Some suggest a marker or a shelter. The depth argues against everyday life, because nobody lives comfortably that far from the entrance. A few fringe voices reach for lost civilizations, but the evidence points cleanly at Neanderthals, the only people here at the time. And if we were this wrong about them, how far back does human capability really reach? To answer that, we travel to the other side of the world. Number 9. Madjedbebe. In the red heart of northern Australia, beneath a sandstone escarpment in Arnhem Land, a rock shelter called Madjedbebe holds a date that upended the story of how humans conquered the planet. This is Mirarr country, and the Aboriginal owners partnered in and guided the excavation. The work, led by Chris Clarkson and published in the journal Nature in 2017, reached the lowest layers of the shelter. There, more than 10,000 stone artifacts lay buried. The deepest were dated to about 65,000 years ago, using a method called optically stimulated luminescence, which measures when grains of quartz sand last saw sunlight. Among the finds were the world's oldest known ground-edge stone axes, tools with a deliberately polished cutting edge. There were also ochre crayons and grinding stones stained with pigment, hints of art and symbol. Reflective mica had been carried in. These were not simple survivalists. They were people with technology and symbolic culture. The date is the shock. For a long time, the standard story said humans reached Australia around 47,000 years ago. 65,000 years pushes that back by nearly 20,000 years. And Australia is not easy to reach. Even with lower Ice Age sea levels, getting to the ancient continent of Sahul required crossing open water, island to island. That means humans had boats or rafts, and the nerve to use them, tens of thousands of years earlier than assumed. The stone tools themselves point to planning. The people carried in specific raw materials, such as silkrete, and shaped them with skill. The ground edge axes required grinding a cutting edge into hard rock, a slow and deliberate process, and they appear here far earlier than anywhere else on Earth. The claim is not without critics. Some argue the sand grains could have shifted, mixing older dates into younger layers. Clarkson's team used a careful single-grain version of the dating method to guard against exactly that. The earlier arrival also reshapes another debate, because it means humans and Australia's giant animals, the megafauna, overlapped for far longer than a quick extinction would suggest. Here is the staggering implication. If people were living in Australia 65,000 years ago, they must have left Africa and crossed all of Asia even earlier. Australia may well have been settled before Europe. The tidy line on the map, humans strolling out of Africa around 60,000 years ago, suddenly looks far too simple. So, when did our species actually leave its birthplace? A single jawbone in Israel has something to say about that. Number 8. Misliya Cave. On the western slope of Mount Carmel in Israel sits a collapsed cave called Misliya. From its deposits came one small fossil, a left upper jaw with its teeth still in place. It is known as Misliya 1, and it rewrote the timeline of our species leaving Africa. The jaw was described in the journal Science in 2018 by Israel Hershkovitz and colleagues. Using 3 separate dating methods, including uranium-thorium and thermoluminescence on burnt flint, they pinned its age between about 177,000 and 194,000 years. At the time, it was the oldest Homo sapiens fossil ever found outside Africa. To see why that matters, recall the old story. For decades, the earliest modern humans in this region, from the caves of Skul and Kafze, were dated to around 120,000 years. Misliya is roughly 60,000 years older than that. The teeth are fully modern in shape, and the tools found nearby use the sophisticated levallois technique, a method of carefully preparing a stone core so that a single, predetermined flake can be struck off. That is a planned, multi-step process, a sign of a capable mind. The burnt flint at the site was itself useful because heating resets an atomic clock inside the stone, allowing the thermoluminescence method to measure how long ago it was last burned. The implication is huge. Homo sapiens was already living outside Africa, in the Levant, far earlier than the main dispersal that supposedly happened around 60,000 years ago. This fits genetic clues that hint at earlier waves of migration, some of which may have petered out or vanished, leaving faint traces in living genomes. It reframes the exodus from Africa as something messy and repeated, not a single, clean departure. Our species pushed out of Africa, retreated, and pushed out again, over and over, across 100,000 years. And in this same corridor, early modern humans would have crossed paths with Neanderthals, setting the stage for the interbreeding written into our DNA today. Some researchers rightly caution that a single jaw is a limited sample and that one fossil cannot carry an entire migration on its own. But Misliya does not stand alone. A skull fragment from Madjedbebe Cave in Greece points to early modern humans in Europe too. Together, they force the same conclusion. We left home earlier, and more often than the textbooks allowed. And that raises the deepest question of all. If we were roaming Eurasia so early, how old is our species itself? First, though, an even more basic human power, older than art, older than burial. Fire. Number 7. Wonderwerk Cave. In the Kuruman Hills of South Africa lies a cave with an apt name. Wonderwerk means miracle in Afrikaans. And deep inside it, archaeologists found evidence for one of the most important turning points in the human story, the mastery of fire. About 30 meters inside the cave, far from the entrance, researchers found burned bone and the ashed remains of plants. The layers date to around 1 million years ago. That places this among the oldest secure evidence anywhere for the controlled use of fire. The work involved Michael Chazan, Leora Kolska-Horwitz, and the geoarchaeologist Francesco Berna, whose microscopic and infrared analysis, published in 2012, showed the burning happened right there, inside the cave, rather than washing in from an outside wildfire. The depth is the key clue. Lightning does not strike 30 meters into a cave. A brush fire does not burn there. For material to be charred that far inside, someone had to bring fire in and keep it going. The people doing so were most likely Homo erectus, an early human ancestor, and hand axes of the Acheulean tool tradition sit in the same layers. The cave's record is staggering in its length, spanning nearly 2 million years of occupation, one of the longest sequences known anywhere. The age of the burned material was pinned down using the record of Earth's magnetic reversals and cosmic ray dating of the sediment, 2 independent clocks that agreed. Why does controlled fire change everything? Because of what it unlocks. The scientist Richard Wrangham proposed the cooking hypothesis, the idea that cooking food was a driving force in human evolution. Cooking makes food easier to chew and digest, releasing far more energy from every bite. That extra energy can fuel an expensive organ, the brain. Fire also gave warmth, protection from predators, and light that extended the day. In other words, this cave preserves a step on the human learning curve without which we might never have become who we are. The path runs from a controlled flame, to cooked food, to more calories, to a larger brain, to everything that followed. Not everyone agrees on how routine this early fire use was. Some researchers see occasional, opportunistic fire rather than a permanent hearth culture. But the Wonderwerk evidence, backed by careful chemistry, pushes the human relationship with fire back deep into our past. A creature that could tame fire 1 million years ago was already on the road to a very different kind of mind. And a mind changed by fire eventually did something no animal had done before. It cared, tenderly, for its dead. Number 6. Panga ya Saidi. On the coast of Kenya, in a cave in the Dzitsoni limestone hills, archaeologists uncovered one of the most quietly moving discoveries in all of prehistory. They call the child mtoto, which means child in Swahili. And mtoto was buried, on purpose, about 78,000 years ago. The find, described in the journal Nature in 2021, is the oldest known deliberate human burial in Africa. The child was around 2.5 to 3 years old. The little body had been placed in a shallow pit dug into the cave floor, curled on its side in a flexed position, as if sleeping. The way the head lay suggests it had been resting on something soft, a pillow, or a bundle, and the body may have been wrapped in a shroud. The bones were far too fragile to lift one by one. So the team, led by Maria Martinon Torres, removed the entire block of surrounding sediment and excavated it in a laboratory under a microscope. Soil analysis confirmed that this was a genuine grave, a body deliberately placed and covered, not the result of natural processes. The decay pattern of the bones showed the little body had rotted in place, inside a filled pit, exactly as a buried body would. The tight, flexed pose, with the limbs drawn in, is hard to explain unless the child was wrapped before burial. Think about what a burial means. It means grief. It means a group of people who chose to lay a dead child in the ground, to arrange the body with care, perhaps to wrap it. It is a symbolic act, a statement that this small life mattered 78,000 years ago. For a long time, the oldest clear burials were found in Eurasia, and some argued that Africa lagged behind in such symbolic behavior. Panga Saidi overturns that. It shows that the deep African roots of the human family included tenderness toward the dead. The cave itself preserves a remarkable 78,000-year record of continuous occupation, including beads and worked ochre, more signs of a symbolic world. This is not brute survival. It is love and loss, recognizably human, pressed into the earth of a Kenyan cave. And if these early people buried their children with care, they were surely doing other symbolic things too, like leaving marks that would outlast them. But first, cross an ocean, to a bog at the bottom of the world that broke one of archaeology's most stubborn rules. Number 5. Monte Verde. On the banks of Chinchihuapi Creek, in southern Chile near Puerto Montt, lies a site that shattered one of the most stubborn beliefs in American archaeology. Its name is Monte Verde, and for years most experts refused to accept it. Tom Delahaye and his Chilean colleagues began excavating in the late 1970s. What made Monte Verde extraordinary was preservation. A peat bog had sealed the site, cutting off oxygen and protecting organic materials that almost never survive. Wood, cordage, hide, and plants all endured. The main occupation, Monte Verde II, dates to about 14,500 years ago. That date was heresy. For decades, American archaeology was ruled by the Clovis First model, the belief that the first people arrived only about 13,000 years ago, marked by a distinctive stone spear point. Monte Verde was older, and it sat near the southern tip of South America, thousands of kilometers from the supposed northern entry. For humans to be that far south, that early, they must have arrived far sooner than anyone allowed. And the evidence was rich. The site preserved a long tent-like structure of wood and hide, along with hearths and knotted cords. There were remains of wild potato, of seaweed carried from the distant coast, and of medicinal plants. There were mastodon bones with signs of butchery. This was a settled, resourceful community, with a broad diet, not a fleeting hunting camp. 9 different species of seaweed turned up at the site, some of them chewed into small quids, still bearing the marks of human teeth. Others had been mixed with medicinal plants. These people knew the shore, the forest, and the marsh intimately, and they carried the sea inland to a home they clearly meant to keep. The resistance was fierce. The turning point came in 1997 when a group of prominent, skeptical archaeologists traveled to Chile to examine the site in person. After seeing the evidence, they accepted it. Monte Verde became the first widely accepted pre-Clovis site, and the wall came down. The seaweed is especially telling. Its species tie the inland settlement to the Pacific shore, supporting the idea that the first Americans traveled down the coast rather than only through an inland corridor, a route now called the Kelp Highway. A deeper, more controversial layer at the site may be 18,500 years old or more, though that remains debated. Delahaye's careful work set a new standard, and it paved the way for accepting even older discoveries. Minds capable of settling a new hemisphere were also, elsewhere, making the first known art. Number 4. Blombos Cave. On the southern coast of South Africa, near Still Bay, a cave looks out over the Indian Ocean. Inside it, archaeologists found what may be the oldest drawing ever made by a human hand. Christopher Henshelwood has excavated Blombos Cave since the 1990s. In 2018, his team reported a small stone flake marked with a deliberate pattern, a crosshatch of 9 lines, drawn with an ochre crayon. Under the microscope, they confirmed the lines were drawn onto the surface, not painted or accidentally scratched. The flake is about 73,000 years old, predating the famous painted caves of Europe, like Lascaux, by tens of thousands of years. It does not stand alone. The cave also yielded pieces of ochre engraved with cross-hatched geometric patterns, dating back 75 to 77,000 years. The patterns repeat, which suggests they were not random. They were a shared symbolic convention. Older still is what the cave reveals about planning. Around 100,000 years ago, the people of Blombos ran what amounts to a paint workshop. They mixed ochre with bone, charcoal, and other materials, using abalone shells as containers. These were recipes, prepared and stored for later use. That is forward planning, a hallmark of the modern mind. The cave also held tick shell beads, pierced to be strung and worn, early ornaments that signal identity and communication. All of this dismantles an old idea, once called the human revolution, which claims symbolic culture erupted suddenly around 40,000 years ago in Europe. Blombos, along with nearby cape sites like Pinnacle Point and Deep Kloof, tells a different story. The modern mind emerged gradually in Africa, long before our ancestors ever left. The researcher Francesco De Rico worked with Henschelwood to analyze the pigments and engravings in detail. By the time humans reached Europe and painted those famous caves, they had already been thinking symbolically for tens of thousands of years. Some cautious researchers still debate what counts as art, and preservation bias hides much of the record. But the direction is clear. Symbolic thought is deep, old, and African. And that raises the obvious next question. If people were drawing 73,000 years ago, how old is the species holding the crayon? Number 3. Omo Kibish. In the lower Omo Valley of southern Ethiopia lie some of the most important fossils of our own species. They were found in 1967 by a team led by Richard Leakey. The fossils, known as Omo 1 and Omo 2, are early members of Homo sapiens, and they keep getting older. For a long time, Omo 1 was dated to about 195,000 years, already making it one of the oldest known members of our species. Then, in 2022, a study led by Céline Vidal took a fresh approach. Instead of dating the fossils directly, the team dated a thick layer of volcanic ash that lay above them. That ash came from a massive eruption of the Shala volcano. By matching the ash's unique chemical fingerprint to the known eruption, the researchers established that everything below it, including Omo 1, must be older than the ash. The new minimum age came out at about 233,000 years. So our species is even older than we thought. Omo 1 has a rounded, modern brain case, the shape of a person like us. Combined with the roughly 300,000-year-old fossils from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, the picture is clear. Homo sapiens did not appear in a single moment or a single place. Our species emerged gradually across the whole African continent over hundreds of thousands of years. The dating works because the Kibish Formation preserves neat layers of ancient lake and river sediment, with volcanic ash sealing them like pages in a book. When you can tie an ash layer to a specific, dated eruption, you get a firm anchor in time. Genetic estimates of when human populations began to diverge are broadly compatible with an origin this old or older. The method has a quiet elegance. The fossils sit below the ash, so they must be older than the eruption that produced it. Once the eruption is dated, the fossils inherit a firm minimum age. It is like finding a sealed letter beneath a dated postmark. The layered sediments of the Kibish Formation, built up by an ancient river and lake, kept the sequence in order for scientists to read. The lesson is humility about our own beginnings. We are not a recent arrival. Our species has been on this planet for well over 200,000 years, its features assembling piece by piece across a vast span. And for much of that time, we were not the only ones with a mind capable of art. Our closest cousins were painting caves of their own. Number 2. Neanderthal Cave Art. In 3 caves in Spain, La Pasiega, Maltravieso, and Ardales, there are marks in red pigment on the stone. A ladder-shaped symbol, a stencil of a hand. For a long time, everyone assumed modern humans made them. Then, someone dated them, and the answer broke a barrier no one expected to fall. The dating, published in the journal Science in 2018, used a method called uranium-thorium dating. Over the centuries, thin crusts of calcite slowly grow over cave paintings. By dating the calcite sitting on top of the pigment, scientists can find a minimum age for the art beneath. The team, led by Dirk Hoffman, Alistair Pike, and João Zilhão, got a shocking result. The art was at least 64,800 years old. That date is the bombshell. Modern humans did not reach this part of Europe until roughly 20,000 years later. So whoever made these marks could not have been us. The only people in Iberia 64,000 years ago were Neanderthals. That means Neanderthals made cave art. Let that sink in. Our supposedly brutish cousins were choosing pigments, planning, climbing into caves, and leaving deliberate symbols on the walls. This is not a chance smudge. It is abstract, symbolic behavior, the same kind we once believed set modern humans apart. Supporting the case, painted and pierced shells from a site called Cueva de los Aviones, roughly 115,000 years old, point to Neanderthals using pigment and ornament long before. The finding is not without dispute. Some researchers question whether the calcite crusts formed exactly over the pigment, or whether the marks truly count as art. That debate continues. But if the dates hold, they demand a rewrite of who Neanderthals were. A key strength of the method is that uranium-thorium dating reaches far beyond the roughly 50,000-year limit of radiocarbon into the deep time where this art was made. That limit matters. Radiocarbon simply cannot see past about 50,000 years, so for most of the Neanderthal story, it is blind. By dating the slow drip of calcite instead, scientists opened a window into a stretch of time that older methods could never reach, and what they saw there was a hand, pressed to a wall, leaving its mark on purpose. Piece by piece, from the rings of Bruniquel to the red symbols of Spain, the old image of the knuckle-dragging caveman collapses. Neanderthals built, planned, and painted. And yet, even art is not the deepest shock in this story. The single most timeline-shattering discovery is not about art, or burial, or even our species at all. It is about a pile of stones by an African lake. Number 1. Lomekwi 3. West of Lake Turkana, in the dry badlands of northern Kenya, lies a site called Lomekwi 3. What was found there does not just adjust the human timeline. It detonates one of the oldest ideas about what makes us human. The discovery, made by Sonia Harmond and Jason Lewis and reported in the journal Nature in 2015, was a collection of stone tools. Large cores and sharp flakes, some weighing over a kilogram, showing the clear scars of deliberate knapping, where one stone is struck against another to shape it. Researchers named this the Lomekwian industry, and then they dated it. The tools are about 3.3 million years old. That number is almost impossible to absorb. The previous oldest known tools, the Old Dowan tradition, were about 2.6 million years old. Lomekwi 3 is roughly 700,000 years older than that. Here's why it changes everything. Our own genus, Homo, the group that includes modern humans, did not even exist 3.3 million years ago. It would not appear for another 700,000 years. So the makers of these tools were not human, not even close in the way we usually mean. They were most likely an Australopithecine, or a relative called Kenyanthropus platyops, whose fossil was found nearby and dates to the same time. For over a century, a comforting phrase defined our species: man, the toolmaker. The ability to craft tools was supposed to be the very thing that separated us from the rest of nature, the spark of humanity. Lomekwi 3 erases that line. Toolmaking is older than humanity. It began before our genus was born, in the hands of small-brained creatures walking beside an ancient lake. The evidence is solid. Researchers were able to refit some flakes back onto their original cores, proving the stones were struck on purpose, not cracked by chance. The site was dated using layers of volcanic ash and the record of Earth's magnetic field, the same reliable clocks used across the Turkana Basin, which is one of the richest archives of human origins on the planet. The refitting is the clincher. When a flake can be fitted back onto the exact core it was struck from, like a puzzle piece, it proves a mind guided the blow. Nature does not break stone that way. Someone sat by that ancient lake, held a hammerstone, and struck with intent 3.3 million years ago. Some scientists reasonably want more sites to confirm such an early industry, and the search continues. But the message of Lomekwi 3 is already clear, and it is the deepest rewrite of all. The story of technology does not begin with us. We inherited it. Look back across these 10 discoveries, and a single thread runs through nearly all of them. In most cases, the revolution did not come from a new dig. It came from a new clock. Uranium series dating cracked the age of Bruniquel and the Spanish Neanderthal art. Optically stimulated luminescence secured Madjedbebe and reset the timeline for Australia. Volcanic ash dating re-aged the Omo fossils. Layers of ash and the record of Earth's magnetic field dated Lomekwi 3. A combination of methods pinned down the Misliya jaw. There is a reason this keeps happening. Radiocarbon dating, the workhorse of archaeology, runs out of reliable range at around 50,000 years. Beyond that, scientists must reach for other clocks entirely, each measuring a different physical process, each with its own window and margin of error. Calcite regrowth, luminescence, volcanic ash, and magnetic reversals all serve as independent timekeepers. Notice the direction of the surprise. Again and again, things turned out to be older than the first estimate. Bruniquel leapt nearly fourfold when it was redated. Omo 1 jumped from 195,000 years to 233,000. The sediment always held the truth. The methods simply had to catch up. Cross-checking with several independent clocks is what turns a bold claim into an accepted fact, which is exactly how the strongest cases here answered their critics. The past did not change. Our ability to measure it did. The dates rewrote when. The discoveries rewrote who. And the picture that emerges is far stranger and richer than the old one. Toolmaking now predates our genus by 700,000 years. Fire was tamed 1 million years ago. Our species is at least 233,000 years old, and probably older. Neanderthals built structures, painted caves, and cared for their dead. Modern humans left Africa far earlier than the textbooks said, and reached distant Australia by 65,000 years ago. The old image of human evolution, a single file line marching from stooped ape to upright modern person, is simply wrong. For most of this vast story, the Earth was home to many kinds of capable minds. Behavior we once treated as ours alone, planning, symbolism, technology, tenderness, was shared across branches of the family and stretched back far deeper in time than anyone expected. We are not the summit of a ladder. We are the late arriving survivors of a long, crowded, and inventive story. Consider the sheer span of it. The first tools were struck 3.3 million years ago. Fire was tamed around 1 million years ago. Our own species appeared more than 200,000 years ago. Art and burial reach back tens of thousands of years on more than one branch of the family. Laid end to end, these dates turn the human story from a short sprint into a marathon that began long before anyone we would call human. And a great deal of that story is about the mind. Consider how far back the evidence for the human mind now reaches. The Blombos drawing predates the painted caves of Europe by tens of thousands of years. The ochre workshops there show planning and recipe making 100,000 years ago. At Panga, Saidi, a child was buried with care 78,000 years ago. In Spain, Neanderthals left painted symbols 64,000 years ago. At Bruniquel, they undertook planned activity deep in the dark. At Madjedbebe, people used pigment 65,000 years ago. Taken together, these finds dissolve the old model of a sudden human revolution, a single moment when our ancestors abruptly became clever. Instead, symbolic thought looks gradual, and it looks shared across more than one kind of human. The capacity to imagine, to mark, to mourn, seems to run through the whole late human family, and it appears in many forms at once: a drawn line on a stone flake, a string of pierced shells worn as a necklace, a pot of mixed pigment stored for later, a child laid gently in a grave, a red symbol painted on a cave wall. None of these is an accident, and none of them is unique to a single kind of human. Each is a mind reaching beyond mere survival, toward meaning. We should stay honest about the limits, because what counts as truly symbolic is debated, and preservation bias hides most of the early record. But the direction is unmistakable. The modern mind did not switch on late and in one place. It grew slowly, in Africa and beyond. Stitch the threads together, and the map of the human journey redraws itself. The Omo fossils and Jebel Irhoud widen our origin, spreading the birth of our species across the whole African continent. The Misliya jaw shows an early exit into the Levant. Madjedbebe shows an early crossing into Australia. And on the far side of the world, Monte Verde drags the peopling of the Americas back thousands of years and reroutes it along the coast. That new timeline reshapes the how, not just the when. With the inland ice-free corridor closed during the last Great Glaciation, researchers increasingly favor a coastal route, the so-called Kelp Highway. Migration begins to look earlier, faster, and far more capable than the old models allowed, likely involving multiple waves rather than one late pulse. Absence of evidence had fooled us because early sites are rare, fragile, and often drowned beneath risen seas. Their silence was mistaken for proof that no one was there. Now, as new dates and new sites converge, a bolder picture emerges of ancestors who reached the ends of the earth long before we gave them credit. Each site is a single dot on that map, but the dots now form lines, and the lines run earlier and farther than the old chart allowed. From an Ethiopian valley to an Israeli cave, from an Australian rock shelter to a Chilean bog, the same message repeats. We moved sooner, traveled farther, and adapted faster than the textbooks ever imagined. Every discovery in this story began as heresy. Clovis first said no one reached the Americas before 13,000 years ago, and Monte Verde proved otherwise. A single cradle for our species was gospel, until Omo and Jebel Irhoud widened it across a continent. Neanderthals were brutes, until Bruniquel and the caves of Spain revealed builders and painters. Toolmaking defined our genus, until Lomekwi III found tools 700,000 years before that genus existed. The skeptics in each of these battles were not villains. They were essential. Their scrutiny forced the daters to check again, to find independent methods, to turn fragile claims into solid knowledge. Science advanced precisely because it was willing to admit the textbook was wrong, and then to rewrite it. Notice the pattern. The Earth keeps older and stranger secrets than we expect, and much remains unresolved. We still argue over the exact dating of the Neanderthal art, the deepest layer at Monte Verde, and the fate of those early human migrations. That uncertainty is not a weakness. It is the honest state of a living science. Knowledge is a draft, revised with every new clock, every new cave, every squeeze through a crack in the rock. And what these 10 discoveries reveal is not a smaller human story, but a vastly larger one. We are one late branch of a deep and crowded family, heirs to a journey more ancient than we ever imagined. The record is far from complete, and that is the most thrilling part, because the next discovery, waiting in the sediment right now, could change everything all over again.